and welcome to Getting to Know ACS with Tracy
and Jasmine.
So today we're going to talk about a subject that people don't like to talk about, but it is something that needs to be talked about. So today we're going to be talking about domestic violence, and we have with us one of our victim advocate. Her name is Brittany, and she's going to tell us what exactly victim advocacy is. So, Brittany, do you want to give us a little spiel of what a victim advocate does, just kind of like in a nutshell?
Okay. So victim advocacy, what we do is information and referral. So say, for instance, we have an incident on Fort Bliss where there is a suspected domestic violence incident. They will call our hotline, which is 24 hours, and we will respond to the hotline. So basically what happens is if they want our services, so our services are all voluntarily. So if the alleged victim wants our services, they will call the hotline. We will set up an appointment and we will discuss what happened in the incident, the last current domestic violence incident, and then we will offer them information referral and then also resources. If it's an unrestricted case, then it will lead to an investigation and more steps will be taken. But if it's restricted, it will stay within us and we will still get them the help that they need.
Okay. Can you go into a little more about what a restricted case is versus an unrestricted case?
Okay. So unrestricted case, it means that it leads to an investigation. So that the chain of command is involved, legal is sometimes involved, CPS is involved, and then it's also an evaluation, and then also treatment. So if the offender, it goes to an IDC board. So basically at the IDC board, a caseworker will present the facts of the case from both individuals, the alleged offender and also the alleged victim. And they will decide if it meets criteria for domestic violence. If it meets criteria for domestic violence, the command is responsible for giving the offender the consequence or the punishment, I guess you would say. And then also they will be able to get treatment at FAP Clinical. If it is restricted means that it just stays within the victim advocate. It's confidential. So they will still be able to get treatment and evaluations, but it doesn't lead to an investigation. It can only be restricted if the command is not aware of the situation, if no children were involved or present during the time of the incident, and if there's no immediate threat to the alleged victim.
Okay. So you said IDC. So just so everybody is clear on what IDC is, that's the Incident Decision Committee?
Yes.
And that is chaired by FAP Clinical?
So FAP Clinical, and then of course the FAP, our FAP manager, so the ACS FAP manager.
Okay. So just so everybody's clear. And then you mentioned about people who couldn't have a restricted were if children are involved.
Right.
Would that include somebody who's pregnant? Because the child isn't actually there. So can they have a restricted report?
No, they cannot. We haven't had a lot of incidents where, but it is immediate threat to the child as well. So even if it's unborn, it is immediate threat. So that means that they cannot have a restricted report.
Okay.
Sorry.
So with the restricted and unrestricted, either way it goes, they get advocacy services.
Right. Exactly.
So you guys are going to be there. So walk me through what you would do. Say I'm a victim, and I come to you. So what kind of resources are you going to give me, or what are you going to talk to me about? What are you going to tell me?
So first we will do a safety plan just to make sure that you are not in any danger or you're not around the alleged offender. Say, for instance, your spouse is a soldier, a E4. So we will call the command to see if we can get a MPO. If it is
what's an MPO?
A military protective order. So normally the command will do a 72-hour cool down. We can ask to extend that as well if you're going through an investigation. If it's restricted, of course, we can't get the command involved. So we will just do a safety plan. If you need to get to a shelter, we'll assist you with getting to a shelter as well. So if you are a victim and you call the hotline and you say, hey, I'm a victim of domestic violence and I want to open a unrestricted reporting case. I want to report this incident. So we will schedule an appointment with you. or you can do, well, right now since COVID, we're not doing walk-ins, so we would have to schedule an appointment. So we will schedule an appointment with you, and then we will do a safety plan. You will also sign a consent form because, of course, you have to give us consent to release your information.
Okay.
And then we will sign reporting options. So basically, that's stating that you want an unrestricted report or a restricted report. After that, we will make sure you have all your resources. We'll give you a resource guide. We'll give you a notebook so you can, yes, that resource guide right there. We'll give you, and it has everything in it. It has everything in it from chaplain services. It has all post services, El Paso PD. They also have victim advocates. It has, if you need a protective order outside of Fort Bliss and outside of the command, it has those numbers in it. It has all the shelters listed in there, food banks, junior enlisted. It has all the services you would need at Fort Bliss in El Paso. So we would give you that resource guide. We will also give you a book. So sometimes the investigation can be a long process, and you talk to multiple people. So we ask that you write down everybody that you've talked to, the conversations that you had, any incidents that you've had with your partner since the abuse started, because you will need that evidence once you talk to the FAP clinical caseworker. And then from there, we'll just, do checkup calls on you, make sure we're also accompanied through court. So if you have to go to court for, let's say if you have to go to court for a protective order or you have to go to court for divorce, we will also accompany you during that court times as well.
Okay. And I want to ask, so let's say somebody comes and they want a restricted case because they're not, they're not comfortable with the services, they're not sure what they're going to do, and then later they come and they're just like, can they switch from restricted to unrestricted?
Yes, they can switch from restricted to unrestricted, but they cannot switch from unrestricted to restricted. So once you do restricted, it goes straight to the command, it goes straight to FAP clinical, it goes straight to an investigation. They cannot pull back on that.
On the unrestricted, right?
On the unrestricted.
Okay.
But they can, if they come in and they're not ready to do a unrestricted and they're not ready to report, they can do a restricted, and we can provide them still services, victim advocacy service, and then maybe next week or a week another incident happens and they say, okay, I'm ready to do unrestricted. It can definitely go from restricted to unrestricted, but it cannot go from unrestricted to restricted.
Because it's kind of like you let everything out the
exactly.
bag.
So
let the cat out the bag.
Right, exactly. So as soon as they come in and they do an unrestricted report, that same day, we have within 72 hours to report that into the system and to get it over to FAP clinical. So within that 72 hours, normally I do it within 24 hours, because obviously if it's unrestricted, you want it to be reported as soon as possible. So it's no turning back.
It's all about the safety of that alleged victim.
Exactly.
Right. So you're mentioning FAP clinical,
yes,
and then ACS FAP. So can you tell us a little bit what the difference is between clinical FAP? And when I'm saying FAP, I remember, you guys remind me about my acronyms. FAP is Family Advocacy Program.
Yes.
Okay, so you have the clinical side of Family Advocacy Program, and then you have ACS side of Family Advocacy Program. So can you give our audience a little different, what the difference is between clinical family advocacy and ACS family advocacy?
Okay, so clinical family advocacy program is they do evaluation and treatment. So they have social workers over there that do counseling, and then our part, the ACS family advocacy program, we are not social work. Well, some of us are, but we are not counselors. Right. So we cannot counsel you. All we do is offer information and referral, and then resources. So we cannot. You come to us and you tell us, hey, what do I do about this? We can give you suggestions, but we cannot counsel you and to tell you what you need to do about this situation. We can give you resources to help you, but we do not counsel people.
Okay, so like FAP Clinical could actually say, hey, you need to be enrolled in, anger management, or you need to be enrolled in couples communication or whatever.
Right.
They can mandate that.
Yes, only if they're a soldier.
Only because, of course, they can't make
exactly. They cannot make a civilian do anything.
Okay.
If they are a soldier, FAP Clinical can mandate them to be in these classes.
Right. ACS FAP,
we cannot.
We can't mandate anybody, soldier or civilian.
Right. We can give you the resources, but we cannot mandate you to do anything.
Okay. So basically, FAP Clinical is intervention,
Exactly.
and ACS FAP
It's prevention.
is prevention and education.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. So when we're talking about domestic violence, is it always male on female, or can it also be same sex? Do you always have just cases that are purely heterosexual cases, or are there incidents where you have same sex domestic violence?
Yes. So we've had cases where it's been same sex, female and female, male and male. We've also had cases where it's been female is the offender and male is the victim, alleged victim. But of course, people think the majority is the female is the victim, and then the male is the aggressor or the perpetrator. But that is not always the case. We also have a lot of financial abuse in the military. And it mostly, you would think that it's women, but it's mostly the men. So it's mostly the male soldiers coming and saying, "Hey, my wife is taking all my money," or they only give me access to $20 a week. Yeah, so we've had incidents like that. So it's not just male on female.
So it's not always. Let's make that clear then, that it's not always the male who is the abuser.
Exactly.
It can also be a female who is abusing the male.
Or it can be same sex as well.
Same sex as well.
Right.
So what types, you mentioned financial. So
what types of abuse? Because I feel like people call me and they're just like, they tell me and then they're like, well, it's not physical. And I'm like, no, guys, like there's more.
Exactly.
I get excited because it's like, I didn't know that before I started working. And then when I found out, I was like, what?
Right. So it's financial, it's physical, it's emotional. Let's see, what other types of abuse that we have?
Spiritual.
Yeah, spiritual. I've seen a lot of like gaslighting.
Wow.
Can you explain gaslighting?
So gaslighting is when they basically go back and forth. Oh, I want you. No, I don't want you. Or I want you. No, I don't want you. Or let's do this. No, I don't want to do that. So it's basically like playing with your emotions. So they get you to where, and it happens a lot in abuse. So they might hit you, and then they bring you flowers the next day and say, "Oh, well, I didn't mean to hit you. I love you so much." That's just showing you how I love you. Yeah. So then they think it's normal because they're going back and forth with you and they're playing with your emotions. So
could gaslighting also be a situation where they're playing kind of like psychological? It's like, okay, you say something, it's like, oh no, I didn't say that, or you know what, you really did tell me to do this, and it's like, no, I didn't tell you, but they mess with you kind of like psychologically, so that you think you start to question your own decision,
and your own judgments,
yeah. So that's I know Jasmine said she was excited, but not excited.
The subject, right? The subject is because there's so much that people don't know that it's good to learn. So that's what I mean by excited, because I've learned the most.
Educate,
and I've learned the most with domestic violence, because I'm just like, wait.
So Jasmine, since you said since you did learn a lot with domestic violence, what are some of the things that you learned, and maybe Brittany can elaborate on it, but some of the things that you weren't aware of when you started working with ACS, some things that you became aware of when it comes to domestic violence?
So the biggest one was that there was different types of abuse, because I had always determined it was just physical. Like if somebody hit you, that's abuse. But then like there's the emotional side, or like controlling, but then the signs that you see before, and you're just like, oh, I saw that, but I didn't think that was abuse.
Right.
Which is, pretty insane, because it's just like, and then once you realize it, you're just like, oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, the most common in the military is the control, because they might separate you from your family. They might tell you, oh, well, you can only talk to your family, on this day.
But then you're already separated from your family.
Right, exactly.
PCS, right?
So the only forms of communication that most people have with their family is the phone. They might take your phone, or they might take your ID card and say, oh, you don't need to go on post without me. So why do you need your ID card? Or we see a lot of, like I said, they take the money, or they take the car, or they don't want you to have a job. So they're the main provider. So if you want to leave them, you can't, because you don't have finances to leave them, because they don't want you to have a job. or they're in charge of all of your medical. They want the doctor to talk straightly to them. We had one case where they wanted, the husband wanted the doctor to talk directly to him and not his wife. So, yeah. So it's a lot of, and then of course you also have to think about culture, because the Army is so diverse.
Right.
So their culture, it might be acceptable in their culture, but here it might not be. So we have to kind of just
discern between whether it's
exactly
whether it's a cultural
thing or is it abuse
right.
and controlling behavior. So.
And then, so when you're talking about, like, emotional abuse, those signs and things where somebody is maybe saying, you don't look good or that type of thing. So what are some emotional things type of emotional abuse that people will right. use to control? Because it's basically coming down to control their victims. So
emotional abuse is the hardest one to prove. A lot of people show text messages saying that, their spouse is saying, I don't like you when you do this, or if you didn't do this, then I wouldn't do this, or you're always nagging and I hate coming home to you, or that's a form of emotional abuse, just basically downgrading you as a person. But it is the hardest to prove. Right. So, yeah. And then could calling somebody out their name on a consistent basis, that would be considered emotional abuse as well? Yes, it would. So it's interesting, the dynamics that you get into when you're looking at people who are abusers or people who are the victims. Does it, can you, I hate to use the word, but can you stereotype? It's like, okay, this type of person is going to be an abuser, or does it go across all lines? It goes across all lines. A lot of people think that we decide who the victim and who, if a person comes to us and they say, hey, I've been abused, we have to take their word for it. We're not the ones that decide if they've been abused or not. Right. That's flat clinical, the clinical side. We have to take their word for it. So we have to, as long as they meet the qualifications that they're a dependent, retiree, active duty, or they're on with the National Guard, they're on Title 13 orders, then we have to give them services. We might have people where we think, oh, they're not the victim. We clearly see that their spouse is the victim, but we can't say that. We have to help them. And then also, if we have a client that comes in and it's the male client, and he states that he's the victim, and then the female states that she's the victim, or the same sex partners state that they're both the victims, we have to help them both, but a different victim advocate will be assigned to them, so it's not conflict of interest. Right. Okay, so they'll each see a different victim advocate. And in those instances, what's it called when you have both people that are, where they're both found to be the abuser? It's called mutual combat. Okay, mutual combat. Yeah, so mutual offender, mutual victim. Okay, so that's good information. And you mentioned that we have a domestic violence hotline. Yes. And it's available 24 hours a day. Yes. 365 days a year, right? Yes. And that number, Jasmine, do you? That number is 915-269-2013. Yay, because, again, I don't know any numbers.
And it's good to clarify, because I feel like a lot of people call me and I'm like, all right, call this number. And they think it's like a 1-800 number. And I'm like, no, somebody is literally on that line that'll help you. Right. And then I feel so bad, because sometimes they're like, well, what do I do? And I'm just like, you do not want to ask me these questions, right? Because I'm right. And if we don't answer, it's only one person on the hotline. So if we don't answer, that means that we're either on the hotline with someone else. That's the only reason. We're on the hotline with someone else. Somebody should always answer. So if we don't answer right away, we have 20 minutes to respond to your call. So we will call you back. So leave a message, or we will see the missed call. Yes. Right. And when we call you back, we don't say, hey, we're a victim advocate, because it could be your spouse who is the offender that's answering your phone.
Going back to that control.
Exactly. So normally we just say, hey, did somebody call this number?
Right. So
Right.
Oh, I did not know that.
Right. We don't state that we're
I
victim
mean, it makes
advocates.
sense, but I didn't,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Because we can be putting you in more danger that way.
Right.
So we always err on the side of caution.
and you guys with ACS Family Advocacy, you only deal with adult victims of abuse. Is that correct?
Yes, we do not deal with child abuse.
Okay.
So according to 608-18,
our Bible.
yes, we you are considered a victim of domestic violence if you share a child with the alleged offender. If you are living with the alleged offender 30 days or more. If it's 30 days or less, that's not us. That's assault or whatever the Army wants to call it. And also if you are a former spouse.
So if someone is divorced,
Right.
and say my ex comes and they abuse me,
Right.
and they're in the military, then they can be charged with domestic violence even though
Right.
we're no longer married.
Exactly.
Okay, and then you said the child, if they have a child in common.
Right. If they have a child in common. So
they
baby
w-
mamas, baby daddies.
Good point. So they didn't have to ever have been married at
Right.
any point. Okay,
Yes.
so that's good information. And then, like I said, so FAP only does adults or
And we also do sexual abuse, but only if it's with your spouse.
okay.
If it's not with your spouse, then that will be sharp.
Okay, so, okay, well, that's interesting. I didn't think about
you
that.
learn
I
something
know.
new every time.
Every time. So
time.
that's why we're getting to know ACS.
Yeah.
So if they're having if their spouse is sexually assaulting them,
Right.
then it comes to you guys.
Exactly.
If it's someone other than their spouse is sexually assaulting them, that goes to SHARP.
Exactly.
Okay, and SHARP is the sexual harassment.
Assault.
I don't know the acronym
Yes,
for that.
prevention.
But yeah, prevention. So you brought up a good point, though. When you're married, you can be sexually assaulted
Right.
by your partner.
Yes.
Because regardless of what your situation is, no means no.
Right.
Right.
So just because you're married, that doesn't give you a free pass.
Exactly.
Okay, so people pay attention to that.
Right.
And I know years ago there was a case where a victim kept very detailed records of when her spouse was sexually assaulting her, and they actually met criteria.
Yes, and it goes to CID, so it goes to CID, so that is a charge.
Yes.
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 So I have a question. So I notice the kind of a trend is people that are going through domestic violence situations kind of confide in somebody that they're close to, whether it's a friend or military spouse that they have become close to. But then that military spouse that they confide in is just like, what do I do? So what are some tips that they could do? Maybe, to like inspire them to seek help, or can they report it, or?
So they cannot report it to us.
Right.
Like I said, our services are voluntary. So my advice would just be to give them the hotline number. We have a lot of calls where like the dad will call from New York and he'll say, my daughter is being abused by her spouse at Fort Bliss. Well, sir, you have to tell your daughter to call us. Because of HIPAA and everything else, we cannot get involved unless they want us to get involved. So they will have to call us directly. So I would just say refer them to call. Encourage them to call our hotline.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
So really the best resource for them, for people who are calling on behalf of someone else, is to basically just make sure that they have the resources. So when they are ready to actually report it, that they know where to report, or like you said, make sure they have that hotline number,
Right.
so that you guys can give them the resources. Because I know it's very, a lot of times people make assumptions about victims, and they're like, oh, you're not leaving the situation, so you must enjoy being in the situation.
Right.
And that's not the case.
No.
Usually, what makes victims stay? Why do victims usually stay in that domestic violence?
It's multiple reasons: finances, accountability. They've been with their person for 20 years. They kind of get used to it. Not really used to it, but they get.
But
used
it's their
to,
normal.
It's their norm. And then also they might have animals that they don't want to leave and go to the shelter. They might not have family that they can go back home to. That I see that's a big one, because their spouse has separated them from their family so much to only rely on the spouse. So it's like, I only have my husband to rely on, or only have my wife to rely on. A big one with males is they're embarrassed because they might have a wife that's like 5'2",
Jasmine
100,
size.
yeah, Jasmine size, and they're like 6 feet, and they're like, oh well, this little girl is beating up on me, or or they love their family, they love their spouse, they don't want to mess up not seeing their kids, because what's the main thing that happens is they take their kids away, or so they don't want to jeopardize that.
And I think
So
that's
it's
a good
reasons.
point to bring out, that although the focus seems to usually be on the female, that there are males who are victims of abuse, and the reasons that they stay is because it's embarrassing.
Right.
And then, people will make fun of them for being abused.
And then if they hit their spouse back, then who goes to
then
jail?
who goes to jail?
And who gets in trouble?
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah.
And then even with same-sex situations, it's like, oh, you're going to let this dude, you didn't
Right.
protect yourself or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably more men who are abused than what the numbers actually
Exactly.
show. Because, and I'll just say, because for statistics-wise,
Right.
1 in every 5 females will be abused, and then 1 in 7 men.
Right.
And so that number for men is probably a lot lower, just because of
A lot of people don't report.
Men don't report
Right.
as often.
And even when we do briefings, we ask how many men will report it, and it's maybe like 2. In the whole room of men, only 2 people will probably report it.
But do they even have anywhere to go? Because like there's shelters for.
Exactly. So the nearest male shelter for domestic violence is Dallas from here. So Dallas is a long ways from here. If they want
men.
shelter, right, for men. If they want shelter, they would have to utilize like the homeless shelter at in El Paso, or they'll have to stay with a friend, or talk to their command to see if they can put them in the barracks. But it's not a lot of shelters for men.
that are for men, that specifically for men who have been abused.
Right, have been abused.
And that's something that the closest one to El Paso is in Dallas.
yes.
So,
Yeah.
and if you don't, I guess if you don't have any other options, then yeah, I'll go to the homeless shelter.
Right.
But men don't have the same resources
Right.
as women. And I think that's something, getting political, that's something that legislation would have
Right.
to change to make it easier for men to report
Right.
that they're being abused.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And another thing is we don't deal with non-support. So if you separate from your spouse and you, we get a lot of calls about that. So if you separate from your spouse and you're looking for the BAH, we do not deal with that. You need to call IG.
right.
Yeah.
So your services that you offer are kind of limited to specifically the abuse side.
Right.
So if you're not getting, if they're not supporting you, if they're not putting food in the house, and you're separated from them, that's a whole different
Right.
thing that they
Now,
need to
if
go
you call the hotline, we will
You're gonna
we're going to help you. We're going to give you the resources. But
to. Right.
yeah, but we get a lot of calls about BAH, and we don't deal with that.
Okay. And then last thing, for child abuse, because we don't deal with child abuse
Yes.
at ACS Family Advocacy.
Right.
So if there are issues for child abuse where somebody is concerned about a child being abused, then they would go to,
So they will contact CPS.
okay.
And then they will also contact FAP Clinical. So everybody in Texas is a mandated reporter
Yeah.
for child abuse. If you see it, report it, because if you don't, and they know, you're gonna get in trouble.
Right, you can be charged.
Yes, you could be charged. So you will report it to CPS or
Okay.
FAP Clinical.
And I'm going to give the CPS, the child abuse hotline number,
Right.
and that's 1-800-252-5400.
Yes.
So that if any cases of child abuse or suspected child abuse, call that number. And then call, if you're in El Paso and you see it, you're going to call the El Paso Police Department. If you're on post and you see it, you're going to call the MPs.
Right.
So, Yeah.
And and one more thing, we do not deal with adultery as well.
Because that's not abuse.
Yes, we do not deal with adultery. That's either the command or IG, I think, but that's not us.
Right. So if I know my spouse is cheating on me, I can't call you and say, "Hey,
right,
come get this person."
Right. You cannot open a case for adultery because we do not deal with that.
Okay.
But I can give you numbers to inflax.
Okay.
If you need to talk about it, right? Like,
yes,
because people get angry, and you just need to release that anger.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yeah. We have multiple resources that we can give you. So if you feel like you have nowhere to go, you can definitely call our hotline, and we will get you where you need to go.
Yes, right. Yes. Again, with ACS, we're there.
Yes. Prevention and education.
Exactly. Right. So we're going to get you where you, even if it's not us, we're going to find out. And Jasmine has that she gets all the calls.
Oh, yes. Just call my line again at 915-568-9129, and I can direct you to where you need to go. I will find where you need to go.
Right.
So.
And Jasmine's really good about that.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure we give that hotline number again for the domestic violence hotline if they're in a situation, and it's 24 hours a day. That's 915-269-2013.
Yes.
And that's the number that they can call for domestic violence. And if you're not in Texas or here at Fort Bliss, then you can Google your domestic violence hotline.
Yes, you can go on MWR has the whole list.
Okay.
Yes, so you can go anybody's MWR, they will have the domestic violence hotline. So if you're at, say for instance, you're at Fort Stewart, you can go MWR Fort Stewart, and it will list the FAB Advocacy program, and they will list the the hotline number.
So,
but yes, you
use
can Google
our
it.
Parent company, our parent organization, MWR.
Yes.
And they can get that number for you. So if you're not listening here at Fort Bliss, there is Victim Advocates. Victim Advocates are at all installations, because I know some ACSs don't have some of the programs that we do, but Victim Advocates are at every installation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's all about keeping. Oh, and you were mentioning, I think you said it, but it doesn't matter if you are the spouse, if you're a civilian, or if you're a soldier who is the victim. Either one can come to you.
Yes. Right.
Okay. All right. You have any more questions?
I do not have any more questions. So.
Any last words you want to give us, Brittany, about domestic violence?
No. I think we covered everything.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
But if you have any questions, hit our hotline.
Hit the hotline and
yes.
Okay. Be like Drake. Hit that hotline number.
Yes.
Okay. So, I had to make light. This is a serious subject.
Right.
Yes. But, we don't have to be so serious. But I just want to say, thank you for coming and giving us the information. Again, this is a very important topic that people find uncomfortable to talk about. But if you see someone, or it's you, that is in a domestic violence situation, make sure you're getting the help you need, because that resource could potentially save somebody's life.
Exactly.
So we would rather, err on the side of life than, I'm going to turn and look away and not get that person help.
Right.
So even if that person's not ready to leave, at least give them resources. And like they said, like Brittany was mentioning, they can come in and do a restricted report and at least come up with a safe plan.
Exactly.
So when they are ready to leave, that they can leave.
Exactly. And it's no judgment. We don't judge. A victim will normally go back 6 to 8 times before they actually leave.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's no judgment. If you decide to go back to your partner, at least, like Tracy said, at least we'll have a safety plan in place so you can get out of that situation when you're ready.
Right. Okay. So with that being said, again, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Brittany, for being here with us today. Thanks for listening to Getting to Know ACS with Tracy
and Jasmine. And don't forget to subscribe and click on that bell notification.
That's right. Till next time. Bye.
Bye.